Chapter 1. The Birth of Philosophy. Before philosophy as we know it, people explained the natural world and their existence through mythology. Myths provided stories about gods, spirits, and forces beyond human control, explanations that shaped the way early humans understood everything from the weather to the workings of the cosmos. In ancient Greece, however, a remarkable shift occurred. A group of thinkers emerged who rejected mythological explanations and sought rational, natural explanations for the world. These thinkers, known as the Pre-Socratics, laid the foundations for a new kind of thinking, one grounded in observation, reason, and inquiry. This moment marked the beginning of Western philosophy, and its legacy continues to shape the way we understand reality today. The pre-Socratic philosophers are often seen as the first to ask fundamental questions about the nature of existence and the universe. These early thinkers didn't rely on mythological or religious explanations for the world around them. Instead, they used reason, observation, and natural inquiry to begin the process of understanding reality. The shift from myth to rational thought was a groundbreaking transition that would form the basis for much of modern philosophy and science. The following philosophers, Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Pythagoras, Parmenides, and Anaxagoras, are the primary figures of this early philosophical movement. Thales of Miletus, often regarded as the first philosopher in the Western tradition, lived in the 6th century BCE in the Greek city of Miletus, in modern-day Turkey. Prior to Thales, people explained the world through divine stories. Thunder was the voice of Zeus, and the harvests were controlled by Demeter, goddess of agriculture. Thales, however, broke from these mythological explanations and looked for a natural cause behind the events in the world. He proposed that the primary substance of the universe was water. He believed that everything in the world could be reduced to this basic substance. This might seem strange to us today, but it was a profound shift in thinking. Water, to Thales, was a fundamental principle that could explain the origins of all things. He argued that water was the source of all life, from which other elements emerged. Thales is often called the father of Western philosophy, not because he was the first to think about the world, but because he attempted to explain the world through reason rather than myth. His radical shift in thinking opened the door to future philosophical inquiry and set the stage for others to follow. His ideas represent the first attempts at understanding the natural world through observation, laying the groundwork for the scientific method that would emerge centuries later. Thales' student, Anaximander, took his teacher's ideas further. While Thales posited that water was the primary substance of the universe, Anaximander introduced a more abstract concept, the apeiron, meaning the infinite or the boundless. Anaximander believed that the apeiron was the origin of all things. Unlike Thales, who identified a specific substance, Anaximander thought that the fundamental principle of the universe must be something beyond all physical elements, something that transcends form, and that could give rise to both order and chaos. The apeiron was, in his view, an eternal and indestructible source of all things, and it would eventually return to its primordial state after cycles of creation and destruction. In addition to introducing the apeiron, Anaximander also proposed one of the first known ideas about the evolution of life. He suggested that life began in the water, and over time, life forms gradually became adapted to the land, with humans evolving from fish-like ancestors. Though his cosmology might seem far removed from modern evolutionary theory, it was a significant early attempt to explain the natural world without recourse to divine intervention. Anaximander's philosophical contributions were groundbreaking because they expanded the scope of thinking beyond a single element like water to a more abstract, almost metaphysical source. This move away from concrete substances towards an infinite, undefined origin marked a significant development in philosophical thought, and it foreshadowed later philosophical ideas about the nature of reality and existence. Heraclitus of Ephesus, another pre-Socratic philosopher, focused on the nature of change. He is best known for his emphasis on the constant flux and change in the world. Heraclitus famously stated, "You cannot step into the same river twice," suggesting that the universe is in a state of perpetual change and that nothing remains static. For him, change was not just an accident or an occasional occurrence, but the very essence of the universe. Heraclitus' primary element was fire, which he saw as the symbol of constant transformation. To him, fire was the embodiment of change, ever consuming, always transforming, never staying the same. Fire, in his view, represented the dynamic and ever-changing nature of reality. Heraclitus is also known for his idea of the unity of opposites. He argued that the world is governed by opposing forces that are interconnected and interdependent. For example, life and death, war and peace, and good and evil are not separate, but rather part of a larger whole. These opposing forces, he believed, are necessary for the balance and order of the universe. This idea was revolutionary in showing that dualities are not in conflict, but are part of a greater unity. Heraclitus' focus on the unity of opposites and the centrality of change influenced later thinkers, particularly in the realms of ethics and metaphysics, where the relationship between opposites would continue to be explored. Heraclitus' view of the world as a constant state of flux and his belief in the harmony of opposites presented a dramatic departure from the static and unchanging views of earlier thinkers like Parmenides. His ideas would become central to the development of later philosophical schools, especially in the work of Plato and Aristotle. While Heraclitus focused on change and flux, Pythagoras of Samos looked to mathematics to explain the world. Pythagoras, often associated with the famous Pythagorean theorem in geometry, believed that numbers were the fundamental principle of all reality. For Pythagoras, the cosmos was not a random, chaotic place, but a harmonious system governed by mathematical relationships. Pythagoras and his followers, known as the Pythagoreans, believed that numbers were not just abstract concepts, but held the key to understanding the universe. They saw numerical ratios as governing everything from the movement of celestial bodies to the vibrations of musical strings. They even believed that the soul was connected to numbers, and that through understanding mathematical harmony, one could achieve a higher understanding of the universe. The Pythagorean view that mathematics underpins all reality was deeply influential, laying the groundwork for later developments in both philosophy and science. It also represented a significant shift from mythological thinking to a more structured, analytical approach to understanding the cosmos. Pythagoras' belief that the universe could be understood through mathematics shaped much of Western intellectual thought, from the later work of Plato to the developments in modern science. Parmenides of Elea presented one of the most profound challenges to early Greek philosophy. In his poem on nature, Parmenides argued that change and motion are illusions. He posited that reality is unchanging, and that being is the only true reality. According to Parmenides, everything that exists must be, and since change implies that something cannot be, change is impossible. This leads him to assert that the universe is eternal and unchanging, a stark contrast to the views of Heraclitus, who saw change as the essence of reality. Parmenides' radical ideas pose difficult questions. If reality is unchanging, what then is the nature of the world we experience? How can we reconcile the apparent change we see with the idea of an eternal, static reality? These questions would continue to influence the development of metaphysics, especially in the works of later philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle. who would grapple with the tension between being and becoming, the static and the dynamic. Parmenides' philosophy also prompted deep reflection on the nature of perception and reality. If change is an illusion, how do we explain the sensory world we experience daily? Parmenides' ideas set the stage for later debates on the nature of reality and the relationship between appearance and truth. Anaxagoras, another important pre-Socratic thinker, introduced the idea of nous, a cosmic mind or intellect that governs the cosmos. For Anaxagoras, the universe was made up of an infinite number of small particles, or seeds, which combined in various ways to create everything we see in the world. But what was the organizing principle behind this process? Anaxagoras believed that it was nous, or mind, that ordered the universe and caused the separation and organization of these particles. Unlike the physical forces of nature, nous was an intelligent and purposeful force that brought order out of chaos. This marked a significant shift in philosophical thought, as it introduced the idea that intelligence or consciousness might be a fundamental force in the universe, a theme that would be explored in much greater depth in later philosophical and theological traditions. Anaxagoras' notion of nous was groundbreaking because it added a new dimension to understanding the universe. It suggested that, beyond the physical forces at work, there might be a rational mind or intelligence at the heart of all things. This concept of nous would influence later thinkers, particularly Plato and Aristotle, and it would lay the groundwork for the development of later metaphysical and theological ideas. The pre-Socratic philosophers were not just speculating about the nature of the world. They were laying the foundation for a new mode of thinking that would shape the future of human thought. By rejecting myth and embracing reason, they made the first steps toward understanding the universe through natural principles, observation, and logic. Though each philosopher had their own unique ideas, they shared a common goal: to find the ultimate principles of reality. In doing so, they shifted the focus of intellectual inquiry from divine explanations to natural and rational ones, laying the groundwork for the development of science, ethics, and metaphysics. This early period in philosophy marked a transformative moment in human history, a moment when reason and inquiry first became the tools by which we would understand our place in the universe. Chapter 2: The Classical Age of Philosophy. After the pre-Socratic philosophers laid the groundwork for rational inquiry and a search for the fundamental principles of reality, Greek philosophy took a new direction. With the rise of Athens as the cultural and intellectual center of the ancient world, new philosophical movements emerged. These movements were driven by an intense focus on ethics, knowledge, and the nature of human existence. The classical period of philosophy was dominated by the contributions of three key figures: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Together, these philosophers transformed the course of Western thought, creating a foundation that would influence not only the development of philosophy, but also science, politics, and ethics for centuries to come. Socrates, who lived from 470 BCE to 399 BCE, is one of the most influential figures in the history of Western philosophy. Unlike the pre-Socratics, Socrates did not focus on the natural world or the cosmos. Instead, his primary interest was human beings, how we should live, what it means to live a good life, and how we come to know anything at all. Socrates believed that knowledge was the key to virtue, and he saw philosophy as a way of improving both individuals and society. Socrates is perhaps best known for his method of inquiry, known as the Socratic method. This approach involves asking a series of questions in order to stimulate critical thinking and expose contradictions in the answers given. The Socratic method was not designed to teach knowledge directly, but to lead the interlocutor toward a deeper understanding of their own beliefs, often revealing that they did not know as much as they thought. This method is based on the idea that wisdom comes from recognizing one's own ignorance. One of the central tenets of Socratic philosophy was his belief in the importance of self-examination. He famously stated, "The unexamined life is not worth living," meaning that a life in which one does not reflect on their actions, beliefs, and values is devoid of true meaning. Socrates' approach to philosophy emphasized the importance of ethical living, virtue, and the pursuit of knowledge as central to human flourishing. Socrates did not write down his teachings. So much of what we know about him comes from the writings of his students, particularly Plato. Despite this, Socrates' impact on philosophy was profound. His focus on ethics, virtue, and knowledge became the core concerns of philosophy in the classical world, and would continue to shape philosophical thought for centuries. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, was born in 428 BCE and lived until 348 BCE. His philosophical ideas were deeply influenced by the teachings of Socrates, and many of his works are written in the form of dialogues, where Socrates is the central character. Plato's philosophy sought to answer some of the fundamental questions posed by Socrates, including the nature of reality, knowledge, and the ideal way to live. One of Plato's most influential ideas is the theory of forms. According to Plato, the world we perceive with our senses is not the true reality. Instead, the true reality consists of abstract, eternal, and perfect forms or ideas that exist beyond the physical world. For example, the form of a chair is not just any particular chair we see in the world, but the perfect, unchanging essence of what it means to be a chair. The objects we see around us are mere imitations or reflections of these perfect forms. Plato believed that the physical world was transient and imperfect, and that true knowledge could only be attained through the intellectual apprehension of these eternal forms. The human soul, according to Plato, is capable of recalling knowledge of the forms, since the soul was thought to have existed before birth in a realm where it had direct access to these perfect ideas. Thus, learning is a process of remembering or recollection of what the soul once knew. In addition to his metaphysical ideas, Plato also had a profound influence on political philosophy. In his work The Republic, Plato outlined his vision of an ideal state. In this work, Plato argued that a just society could only exist when people performed the roles they were best suited for. According to Plato, the state should be ruled by philosopher kings, wise and virtuous individuals who could see beyond the illusions of the material world and understand the true nature of justice and the good life. The Republic is also famous for its discussion of the allegory of the cave, which illustrates how most people live in ignorance, seeing only shadows of the true reality, while the philosopher seeks to ascend to the higher knowledge of the forms. Plato's philosophical system sought to unify ethics, metaphysics, and politics into a coherent framework, and his ideas became a cornerstone of Western philosophy. His theory of forms, in particular, had a lasting impact on metaphysical thought and would be influential in both Christian theology and later philosophical developments. Aristotle, Plato's student, was born in 384 BCE and lived until 322 BCE. Unlike Plato, Aristotle rejected the theory of forms and believed that the study of the natural world and empirical observation were essential for understanding reality. While Plato focused on abstract, ideal forms, Aristotle believed that the essence of things could be found in their material substance and the way they function in the world. Aristotle's work covered a vast range of subjects, including logic, ethics, metaphysics, politics, biology, and the philosophy of science. He is often regarded as the father of empiricism, the belief that knowledge is derived from sensory experience and observation of the physical world. Aristotle's system of logic, known as syllogistic logic, was a groundbreaking approach to reasoning that influenced Western thought for centuries. A syllogism is a form of deductive reasoning that uses two premises to reach a conclusion. Aristotle's work on logic was later compiled into a system that became the foundation for the study of logic in the Middle Ages and beyond. In his Metaphysics, Aristotle argued that reality consists of both form and matter. Unlike Plato, who posited a realm of perfect eternal forms, Aristotle believed that forms exist within particular objects in the world. Every object in the universe has both substance, matter, and form, the essence that defines it. According to Aristotle, everything in the natural world has a purpose, or telos, and the study of an object's purpose is essential for understanding its true nature. Aristotle was also deeply interested in ethics, and his Nicomachean Ethics is one of the most important works in the history of moral philosophy. In it, Aristotle discusses the nature of virtue and the good life. He famously argued that happiness, or eudaimonia, is the highest good and that it is achieved through the cultivation of virtue. Virtue, for Aristotle, is a mean between excess and deficiency. For example, courage is the mean between recklessness and cowardice. Aristotle's ethical system is based on the idea that people achieve their full potential and live the best life when they develop their rational capacities and live in accordance with virtue. In politics, Aristotle's work Politics analyzed different forms of government, including monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. Unlike Plato, who envisioned philosopher kings, Aristotle believed that a well-functioning government would be one that balanced the interests of the rich and poor and ensured the well-being of all citizens. He argued that democracy, when properly structured, could be the most just form of government, though he also warned against the dangers of mob rule. Aristotle's empirical approach to science and his detailed observations of the natural world laid the foundation for the scientific method. His works on biology, physics, and other natural sciences dominated Western thought for over 1,000 years. Aristotle's contributions to logic, ethics, and politics also remain central to philosophical discourse today. The philosophy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle forms the bedrock of Western intellectual tradition. Their ideas about knowledge, ethics, politics, and the nature of reality influenced countless thinkers in the centuries that followed. Socrates' emphasis on self-examination and the pursuit of virtue, Plato's metaphysical theories and vision of an ideal state, and Aristotle's empirical approach to understanding the world all contributed to the development of philosophy as we know it. While each of these philosophers had a distinct approach, they all shared a commitment to reason and the search for truth. Socrates challenged individuals to examine their lives. Plato sought to understand the nature of reality through abstract forms, and Aristotle grounded his philosophy in the observation of the natural world. Together, they laid the foundations for philosophy, science, ethics, and politics, and their ideas continue to shape our thinking today. Their legacy is not just in the specific ideas they advanced, but in the methods they developed for critical thinking, the questions they asked, and the ways in which they pushed humanity to strive for greater knowledge, virtue, and understanding. The classical age of philosophy stands as one of the most important periods in the history of human thought, and its influence remains as vital as ever. Chapter 3: The Hellenistic Age and the Rise of New Philosophical Schools. After the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE, the Greek world underwent profound changes. The vast empire that Alexander had created fragmented into several Hellenistic kingdoms, stretching from Greece and Egypt to Persia and India. This period, known as the Hellenistic Age, saw a significant shift in philosophical thought. While the classical philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle had focused on the nature of knowledge, virtue, and the ideal state, the Hellenistic philosophers turned their attention to individual happiness and the nature of the good life in a world marked by political instability and social change. With the decline of the Greek city-state as the central political unit, philosophers sought to provide new answers to the question of how one should live in a world that seemed uncertain and chaotic. During this period, four major schools of thought emerged: Stoicism, Epicureanism, skepticism, and cynicism. Each of these schools offered a different approach to achieving happiness and dealing with life's challenges. While they diverged in their methods, all sought to help individuals find peace of mind, tranquility, and contentment in a rapidly changing world. The Stoic school of philosophy was founded by Zeno of Citium in the early 3rd century BCE. Stoicism became one of the most influential philosophical movements in the Hellenistic world, and its ideas would later be adopted by Roman thinkers like Seneca, Epictetus, and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. At the heart of Stoicism is the belief that virtue is the highest good, and that a wise person should strive to live in harmony with nature and reason. Stoicism teaches that the key to achieving happiness lies in controlling one's own mind and responses, rather than external circumstances. Zeno taught that the universe is governed by a rational order or logos, and that everything that happens is a part of this divine plan. According to the Stoics, human beings are rational creatures, and our nature is to live according to reason. The Stoics argued that the pursuit of wealth, fame, or pleasure is ultimately futile because these things are beyond our control. Instead, they taught that we should focus on developing our inner virtues, such as wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. One of the central Stoic ideas is the distinction between what is in our control and what is not. The Stoics believed that while we cannot control external events, we can control our own thoughts, judgments, and actions. By accepting the things we cannot change and focusing on cultivating virtuous character traits, we can achieve inner peace and tranquility, regardless of the circumstances we face. This concept is encapsulated in the famous Stoic mantra, "Control what you can control and accept what you cannot." The Stoics also emphasized the importance of apatheia, the state of being free from passion and emotional turmoil. This does not mean that Stoics advocated for a life devoid of emotions, but rather that one should not be controlled or overwhelmed by destructive emotions like anger, fear, or grief. Instead, a Stoic seeks to maintain equanimity and resilience in the face of adversity, accepting life's challenges with grace and rationality. Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus in the 4th century BCE, presented an alternative to Stoicism by focusing on the pursuit of pleasure as the highest good. However, unlike the hedonistic views of later philosophers, Epicurus advocated for a more moderate and thoughtful approach to pleasure, emphasizing the importance of intellectual satisfaction and the absence of pain, rather than indulgence in physical pleasures. Epicurus taught that the goal of life is to achieve ataraxia, a state of tranquility and freedom from fear and anxiety. He believed that pleasure, understood as the absence of physical pain, aponia, and mental distress, was the natural goal of human life. However, he did not advocate for the pursuit of short-term fleeting pleasures such as excessive food, drink, or sensual gratification. Instead, he argued that the greatest pleasures are found in simple, moderate pleasures: friendship, knowledge, and the contemplation of nature. Epicurus also introduced a materialist conception of the universe, which was in contrast to the Stoic belief in a divine rational order. According to Epicurus, everything in the universe is made up of atoms, and all natural phenomena can be explained by the interactions of these atoms. He believed that the gods existed but were indifferent to human affairs, and that fear of gods and death was a major source of anxiety for people. By understanding the natural world and the true nature of life and death, Epicurus argued that we could overcome our fears and achieve lasting happiness. Epicureanism placed a high value on friendship, which Epicurus saw as one of the most reliable sources of happiness. He argued that friendships built on mutual respect and shared pleasure were vital for achieving ataraxia. In contrast to the individualistic nature of Stoicism, Epicureanism recognized the importance of community and the bonds of affection in cultivating a fulfilling life. Skepticism, as a philosophical school, was most notably developed by Pyrrho of Elis, who lived in the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE. Skepticism teaches that because human beings are prone to error and uncertainty, it is difficult, if not impossible, to know anything with absolute certainty. Rather than offering a definitive theory of how one should live, the skeptics proposed that the way to achieve peace of mind was through epicé, or the suspension of judgment. By recognizing the limitations of human knowledge and refraining from making definitive claims about the nature of reality, the skeptics argued that we could avoid anxiety and live more contentedly. Pyrrho and later skeptics, like Sextus Empiricus, argued that all perceptions and beliefs are subjective, and that there is no objective standard by which to judge the truth of our experiences. This led them to adopt a position of radical doubt, where they questioned the validity of sensory perceptions, concepts of morality, and even the existence of an external world. They argued that by suspending judgment on all matters, one could achieve a state of tranquility, free from the stress and conflict that arise from conflicting beliefs. While skepticism was not a philosophy of positive belief, it was an important development in the Hellenistic period because it questioned the very possibility of certain knowledge. Skepticism laid the foundation for later philosophical traditions that would explore the limits of human understanding and the role of doubt in the pursuit of knowledge. Cynicism, founded by Antisthenes in the 5th century BCE, was a radical philosophical movement that rejected societal norms, materialism, and the pursuit of wealth and power. The Cynics believed that true happiness could only be achieved by living a life of simplicity and self-sufficiency, free from the corrupting influences of society. The most famous representative of cynicism was Diogenes of Sinope, a figure known for his eccentric behavior and disdain for social conventions. Diogenes famously lived in a barrel, or large ceramic jar, on the streets of Athens, and performed various outrageous acts to challenge the social norms of his time. He is said to have wandered through the streets of Athens with a lantern in daylight, proclaiming that he was looking for an honest man. Diogenes' actions were meant to demonstrate the absurdity of social pretensions and to show that happiness could be found in living in accordance with nature, free from material concerns. The Cynics believed that the pursuit of wealth, status, and power led people away from their true nature, and that only by embracing poverty and simplicity could one achieve true freedom and happiness. Their philosophy was a critique of the materialistic values of society, and their radical rejection of convention influenced later philosophical movements, including Stoicism, which adopted many of the Cynic ideals. The Hellenistic philosophers, Stoics, Epicureans, skeptics, and cynics, responded to the political and social turmoil of their time by offering new paths to achieving happiness, tranquility, and wisdom. In a world that seemed unstable and unpredictable, these thinkers focused on the importance of personal virtue, intellectual contemplation, and emotional resilience. Whether through the Stoic pursuit of inner peace, the Epicurean emphasis on moderate pleasures, the skeptic's search for certainty through doubt, or the cynic's rejection of societal norms, Each of these schools provided a response to the challenges of living a meaningful life in a changing world. Their ideas continued to influence not only philosophy, but also psychology, politics, and ethics for centuries. The Stoic focus on emotional resilience and the Epicurean commitment to finding happiness through simple pleasures are still relevant today. The skeptical approach to knowledge and the cynic rejection of materialism can be seen in modern debates about the nature of truth and the role of society in shaping individual lives. The legacy of the Hellenistic philosophers lies not just in their doctrines, but in their emphasis on personal responsibility and the search for inner peace. Their ideas remind us that, no matter the challenges we face, the pursuit of wisdom and virtue is a path that can lead to a life well lived. Chapter 4: Roman Philosophy, Neoplatonism, and the Rise of Christian Thought. As the Hellenistic world gradually gave way to the dominance of the Roman Empire, Greek philosophy continued to evolve. Roman thinkers, although influenced by Greek ideas, often took a more practical, applied approach to philosophy, with a focus on ethics, public life, and personal conduct. In this period, Stoicism became one of the most prominent schools of thought in Rome, alongside the growing influence of Neoplatonism and the emergence of Christian philosophy. These philosophical movements, in turn, paved the way for the development of medieval philosophy. The intellectual landscape of Rome was not as concerned with speculative metaphysics as in earlier periods. Rather, Roman philosophy was more oriented toward guiding individuals in how to live a virtuous life within the context of Roman society. During this period, philosophy was seen as a tool to help individuals navigate the complexities of life and attain moral excellence. It was also a time when the blending of philosophy and religion began, eventually leading to the philosophical foundations of Christian theology. Roman Stoicism, epitomized by philosophers like Seneca, Epictetus, and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, took the Stoic emphasis on virtue and personal integrity and applied it to the realities of Roman life. While the Stoics of the Hellenistic period focused on living in accordance with nature, the Roman Stoics concentrated on how to deal with the challenges of life, from political power and social obligations to personal suffering and moral character. Seneca, 4 BCE, 65 CE, a philosopher, statesman, and playwright, is one of the most important figures of Roman Stoicism. In his writings, Seneca emphasized the importance of mastering one's emotions and cultivating inner peace, even in the face of hardship. He argued that external events, whether good or bad, were not within our control, and the only thing that we truly control is our response to those events. For Seneca, the cultivation of virtue was the path to achieving happiness, and he advocated for a life of simplicity and self-discipline. Epictetus, 55, 135 CE, a former slave who became a renowned Stoic philosopher, contributed significantly to Roman Stoicism with his practical teachings on how to live a virtuous life. His central message was that individuals should focus on what is within their control and let go of concern for things outside their control. Epictetus taught that true freedom comes not from external circumstances, but from mastering one's inner life. He famously said, "We are disturbed not by what happens to us, but by our thoughts about what happens to us." His teachings were recorded by his student, Arrian, in the Discourses and the Enchiridion, which became influential works in both the Roman world and later Western philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, 121–180 CE, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, is best known for his Meditations, a series of personal reflections on Stoic philosophy and how to live a virtuous life. His writings were not intended for publication, but were a form of self-examination and mental discipline. Marcus Aurelius emphasized the importance of accepting the natural course of events and remaining focused on virtue and wisdom, regardless of the external pressures of ruling an empire. His meditations are a guide to inner calm, resilience, and ethical conduct in the face of power, responsibility, and personal struggle. The Stoics had a lasting impact on Roman intellectual life. They helped shape Roman concepts of duty, personal responsibility, and the moral duties of a ruler. Their influence also extended to later Christian thinkers, particularly with regard to ethics and the cultivation of virtue. As the Roman Empire moved into the 3rd century CE, a new philosophical movement emerged, which sought to synthesize Platonic ideas with more mystical elements. This school of thought is known as Neoplatonism, and its most significant figure was Plotinus, 204–270 CE. Neoplatonism became an important philosophical system that would deeply influence early Christian thinkers, as well as later developments in medieval philosophy. At the heart of Neoplatonism is the idea of the One, a transcendent, ineffable source of all existence. According to Plotinus, the One is beyond all being and cannot be comprehended by human reason or language. All of reality emanates from the One in a hierarchical process, with each successive level of reality being less perfect and more distant from the source. From the One emanates the nous, divine intellect, which is the realm of pure thought and the source of all forms and intelligible concepts. From the nous comes the soul, the principle of life and motion in the universe, which animates all living beings. Neoplatonism emphasized the importance of returning to the One through intellectual and mystical contemplation. Plotinus believed that the soul, which originates from the One, can be reunited with it through self-purification and spiritual ascent. This idea of ascent and union with the divine was influenced by both Platonic philosophy and Eastern religious traditions, and it would be taken up by early Christian thinkers, particularly in their conception of salvation and the soul's union with God. Neoplatonism also developed an elaborate system of metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. Plotinus argued that knowledge is a process of returning to the source of all knowledge, the divine intellect, and that the soul's journey back to the One is a process of becoming more fully aligned with the divine order. For Plotinus, the true aim of life was not the pursuit of pleasure or material wealth, but the cultivation of wisdom, virtue, and divine insight. The influence of Neoplatonism extended far beyond Plotinus himself. His ideas were further developed by later philosophers, such as Porphyry, Iamblichus, and Proclus. Neoplatonism also had a profound influence on early Christian theology, particularly on the development of the Christian understanding of God, the soul, and salvation. As the Roman Empire continued to expand, the rise of Christianity brought with it a new way of understanding the world. Early Christian thinkers, such as Augustine of Hippo, 354–430 CE, played a key role in the development of Christian philosophy by integrating elements of Greek philosophy, particularly Neoplatonism and Stoicism, with Christian teachings. Christian philosophers sought to answer fundamental questions about the nature of God, the soul, salvation, and the relationship between faith and reason. Augustine, one of the most important philosophers in the history of Christianity, is known for his writings on the nature of God, the problem of evil, and the human condition. His work Confessions is both a spiritual autobiography and a philosophical reflection on the nature of grace, free will, and divine intervention. Augustine famously argued that human beings are born with original sin, but that through God's grace, salvation and redemption are possible. For Augustine, the soul's ultimate goal is to achieve union with God, which is the source of all truth and goodness. In his later work, The City of God, Augustine offered a profound philosophical reflection on the relationship between the earthly city, Rome, and the heavenly city, the kingdom of God. Augustine argued that while the earthly city is marked by sin and corruption, the heavenly city represents the ultimate fulfillment of God's plan for humanity. Augustine's blending of Platonic ideas with Christian theology laid the foundation for much of medieval Christian philosophy. Augustine's work was immensely influential on Christian thought, and his ideas would shape not only the development of Christian theology, but also the broader history of Western philosophy. His integration of faith and reason, as well as his reflections on the nature of time, knowledge, and the self, would have a profound impact on later philosophers, including Thomas Aquinas and other medieval scholastics. The transition from Greek philosophy to Roman thought, Neoplatonism, and the rise of Christianity marked a significant turning point in the history of philosophy. Roman Stoicism provided a practical philosophy for living a virtuous life in the context of Roman society, while Neoplatonism offered a metaphysical system that emphasized the soul's ascent toward divine unity. The rise of Christianity brought about a profound synthesis of faith and reason, with thinkers like Augustine laying the groundwork for the Christian intellectual tradition. The ideas developed by Roman philosophers and early Christian thinkers would have a lasting influence on the Middle Ages and beyond. The ethical teachings of the Stoics, the metaphysical insights of Neoplatonism, and the theological reflections of Christian philosophers helped shape the intellectual foundations of Western civilization. The integration of Greek philosophy with Christian thought would be a central theme in medieval philosophy and would continue to influence philosophical discourse for centuries to come. Chapter 5: Medieval Philosophy, the Synthesis of Faith and Reason. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century to the Renaissance in the 14th century, was characterized by a profound synthesis of classical philosophy with Christian theology. During this time, philosophy was largely concerned with the relationship between faith and reason, the nature of God, and the meaning of human existence. The Church played a central role in shaping intellectual life, and philosophy was seen primarily as a tool to understand, explain, and defend Christian doctrine. Medieval philosophers, particularly in the early and high medieval periods, worked within the framework established by the early Christian thinkers, such as Augustine of Hippo. They were also deeply influenced by Greek philosophy, especially the works of Aristotle and Plato, and later by Islamic and Jewish philosophers who had preserved and commented on these ancient texts. The medieval philosophers sought to reconcile the teachings of faith with the reason and logic of classical philosophy, a task that became a central intellectual project of the Middle Ages. Augustine of Hippo, 354–430 CE, was one of the most influential philosophers of the early medieval period. While his works were deeply theological, his philosophical reflections on issues like the nature of the self, the problem of evil, and the relationship between time and eternity set the stage for much of medieval philosophy. In his famous work Confessions, Augustine discussed the nature of human experience and the process of spiritual transformation. He reflected on how his own life, from sinful youth to Christian conversion, mirrored the journey of the human soul toward God. One of his central ideas was that true knowledge and wisdom come from God, and the search for understanding must be rooted in faith. For Augustine, philosophy was not opposed to Christianity, but rather was a tool that could be used to illuminate the truths of faith. Augustine's concept of divine illumination was a central tenet in his thought. He argued that all human knowledge, including our understanding of truth, beauty, and morality, ultimately comes from God. This view directly countered the purely empirical, rationalistic approach of the ancient philosophers like Aristotle, who emphasized human reason and sensory experience. Augustine, on the other hand, believed that without God's grace, human reason was insufficient for understanding the highest truths. Augustine also addressed the problem of evil in a way that would influence Christian thought for centuries. He argued that evil is not a substance or a force of its own, but rather a privation of good, a lack of harmony in creation. This theological understanding helped frame the medieval Christian worldview, where human beings were seen as fallen creatures in need of divine redemption. An important figure in the early Middle Ages was Boethius, 480–524 CE, a philosopher and statesman. His most famous work, The Consolation of Philosophy, written while he was imprisoned, blends elements of Greek philosophy with Christian theology and is considered one of the most influential texts of the medieval period. Boethius sought to address the problem of suffering and the apparent injustice in the world by using philosophy to guide the reader toward a higher understanding. In The Consolation, Boethius engages in a dialogue with Lady Philosophy, who helps him understand that true happiness does not lie in external goods, such as wealth, power, or fame, but in the pursuit of wisdom and virtue. His work is largely influenced by the writings of Plato and Aristotle, particularly the concept of the good, but Boethius integrates these ideas into a Christian framework by asserting that ultimate happiness can only be found in God. Boethius is also significant for his role in preserving and transmitting the works of Aristotle to the Latin-speaking West. He translated and commented on Aristotle's works, especially his logic, and introduced key concepts from Greek philosophy to the Christian scholars of the Middle Ages. His translations and commentaries on Aristotle would later influence medieval scholasticism, particularly the work of Thomas Aquinas. Anselm of Canterbury, 1033–1109 CE, was one of the most important figures in the early Middle Ages, known for his work in the philosophy of religion and theology. Anselm is often credited with developing the concept of faith-seeking understanding, which became a central theme of medieval thought. For Anselm, philosophy was not meant to replace faith, but to complement it, helping to clarify and deepen the understanding of Christian doctrine. Anselm is perhaps best known for his ontological argument for the existence of God, which he presents in his work Proslogion. The ontological argument is a unique attempt to prove God's existence through reason alone, rather than empirical observation. Anselm's argument runs as follows. God, by definition, is the greatest possible being that can be conceived. A being that exists in reality is greater than one that exists only in the mind. Therefore, since God is the greatest possible being, he must exist in reality, as existence is a perfection. This argument sparked centuries of debate and critique, but it remains a significant development in the history of philosophy and theology. Anselm's writings also address the nature of God's attributes, particularly his omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. Anselm's work laid the groundwork for the later medieval synthesis of faith and reason, which would reach its peak with Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas, 1225–1274 CE, is often regarded as the most influential philosopher of the medieval period. His synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology became the cornerstone of scholasticism, the dominant intellectual tradition of the Middle Ages. Aquinas sought to demonstrate that faith and reason are not in conflict, but rather complement each other. He argued that while certain truths, such as the existence of God, could be known through reason, other truths, such as the mysteries of the Trinity and the Incarnation, could only be known through divine revelation. In his monumental work, Summa Theologica, Aquinas provided a systematic account of Christian theology, presenting arguments for the existence of God, the nature of the soul, morality, and the sacraments. Aquinas adopted much of Aristotle's philosophy, particularly his ideas about logic, ethics, and metaphysics. He used Aristotle's idea of substance to develop his own arguments for the existence of God. For example, Aquinas' famous 5 ways quinque via are 5 arguments for the existence of a first cause or God, based on observation of motion, causality, contingency, degree, and design in the natural world. One of Aquinas' central contributions was his development of natural law theory. He argued that human beings, through the use of reason, can discern the natural law, which is based on the eternal law of God. This concept would later influence Western political theory, especially the idea of natural rights. While Aquinas was deeply committed to the truths of Christianity, he believed that reason could be used to explore and explain the nature of the divine order. His work became foundational to the development of Catholic theology and greatly influenced Western thought for centuries. Medieval philosophy was primarily concerned with reconciling reason with faith, and the development of ideas during this period laid the intellectual groundwork for the modern philosophical and theological landscape. Thinkers like Augustine, Boethius, Anselm, and Thomas Aquinas provided the philosophical tools for understanding the nature of God, the soul, morality, and the ultimate purpose of human life. The synthesis of classical philosophy, particularly the works of Aristotle and Plato, with Christian theology created a framework for addressing the complex questions of existence, ethics, and the divine. Medieval philosophy also set the stage for the intellectual revival of the Renaissance, when the rediscovery of classical texts and the rise of humanism led to a renewed focus on human potential and the nature of the self. However, the work of medieval philosophers continued to be influential in shaping the ideas of later philosophers, especially during the Enlightenment, when debates about reason, faith, and the role of religion in public life would come to the forefront. In the end, medieval philosophy's most enduring legacy lies in its deep exploration of the relationship between reason and faith, and in its attempt to provide a coherent and systematic understanding of the divine and the natural world. Its intellectual achievements continue to resonate today, particularly in theology, ethics, and the philosophy of religion. Chapter 6: Modern Philosophy: The Birth of the Self, Reason, and the Scientific Revolution. The transition from medieval philosophy to modern philosophy marked a shift in intellectual concerns, with an increasing focus on human reason, individual experience, and empirical evidence. This period, spanning from the Renaissance to the late 18th century, saw dramatic changes in both philosophy and science, leading to a new understanding of the world and humanity's place within it. The rise of modern philosophy is closely tied to the development of the scientific method, the questioning of authority, and the emergence of new political and social ideas. The development of modern philosophy can be traced through several key movements and philosophers, each contributing to the transformation of the intellectual landscape. During this time, the focus shifted from the medieval emphasis on divine revelation and theological concerns to an emphasis on human reason, the empirical study of the natural world, and the quest for political and individual freedom. The Renaissance, 14th–17th century, was a period of renewed interest in classical Greek and Roman culture, which paved the way for the rise of humanism. Humanism placed a strong emphasis on human potential, creativity, and the study of classical texts. In philosophy, this led to a new focus on individual experience, and a break from the theological constraints of the medieval period. One of the most important figures in Renaissance philosophy was Niccolò Machiavelli, 1469–1527, whose works on political philosophy, particularly The Prince, advocated for a pragmatic and often ruthless approach to politics. Machiavelli's ideas about power, leadership, and statecraft marked a departure from the medieval Christian view of governance and provided a foundation for modern political theory. Though not a philosopher in the traditional sense, Machiavelli's exploration of political reality was highly influential in the Renaissance. The Renaissance also saw the beginning of the scientific revolution, with figures such as Nicolaus Copernicus, Galileo Galilei, and Johannes Kepler challenging the geocentric model of the universe and laying the groundwork for modern science. The scientific method, grounded in observation, experimentation, and rational analysis, became central to understanding the natural world and would have a lasting impact on both philosophy and science. The true beginning of modern philosophy, however, is often attributed to René Descartes, 1596–1650, a French philosopher who sought to establish a new foundation for knowledge. Descartes is best known for his famous dictum, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This statement became the starting point for his method of radical doubt, in which he doubted everything, his senses, the physical world, and even the existence of God, until he arrived at the certainty of his own existence as a thinking being. Descartes' philosophy is rooted in a dualism between mind and body. He argued that the mind, or soul, and the body are distinct substances, with the mind being a non-material substance that thinks and reasons, while the body is a material substance that exists in space and obeys physical laws. This Cartesian dualism laid the groundwork for future debates in philosophy, particularly regarding the nature of consciousness and the relationship between the mental and the physical. Descartes' skepticism and reliance on reason as the foundation of knowledge were instrumental in the development of modern epistemology. His work, particularly in Meditations on First Philosophy, explored the nature of reality and the limits of human knowledge. Descartes' emphasis on the primacy of reason and the self as the starting point for knowledge set the stage for later developments in philosophy and science. Following Descartes, the philosopher Baruch Spinoza, 1632–1677, a Dutch Jewish thinker, offered a radically different approach to the nature of reality. Spinoza rejected Descartes' dualism and instead proposed a form of pantheism, in which God and nature are not separate but are one and the same. According to Spinoza, everything that exists is part of one single, infinite substance, which he identified as God or nature, Deus sive natura. In this view, God is not a personal, transcendent deity, but rather the totality of existence itself. Spinoza's Ethics is a systematic work that combines metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. He argued that the path to human freedom lies in understanding the natural laws that govern the universe and recognizing that everything, including human behavior, is determined by these laws. For Spinoza, true freedom comes not from the ability to act arbitrarily, but from the ability to understand and align oneself with the necessary order of the world. Spinoza's philosophy had a profound impact on later thinkers, particularly in the areas of ethics and the philosophy of religion. His ideas about determinism and the nature of human freedom influenced later discussions on free will and moral responsibility. As the 17th century progressed, John Locke, 1632–1704, an English philosopher, became one of the most influential figures in the development of modern thought. Locke is often regarded as the father of empiricism, the view that knowledge is derived from sensory experience, and that human beings are born as tabula rasa, blank slates, upon which experience writes. In his seminal work An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, 1689, Locke argued that all knowledge comes from experience, either through sensation, the experience of the external world, or reflection, the internal workings of the mind. He rejected the notion of innate ideas, which had been a central feature of earlier philosophy, particularly in the work of Descartes. For Locke, the mind is initially empty, and through experience it acquires knowledge and ideas. Locke was also an important figure in political philosophy. In his two treatises of government, 1689, he argued that individuals have natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that the role of government is to protect these rights. His ideas on the social contract and the separation of powers greatly influenced the development of modern liberal democratic thought, especially in the works of later political philosophers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Thomas Jefferson. In the 18th century, David Hume, 1711–1776, a Scottish philosopher, further developed the empiricist tradition, but with a more radical skepticism about the limits of human reason. Hume argued that human knowledge is grounded in habit and experience rather than reason or logic. In his A Treatise of Human Nature, 1739–1740, Hume proposed that the human mind is incapable of knowing anything beyond the realm of immediate experience, and that concepts like causality and the self are merely the result of habitual patterns of thought. Hume is also famous for his skepticism about religion, particularly the arguments for the existence of God. In his Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, 1779, he critiqued the traditional arguments for God's existence, particularly the design argument, suggesting that the world's imperfections make it improbable that it was created by a perfect deity. Hume's skepticism had a profound impact on the development of philosophy, especially the philosophy of science. His work challenged the assumption that reason could provide certain knowledge about the world, paving the way for later philosophical movements, including Immanuel Kant's critical philosophy. The culmination of 18th century philosophy came with Immanuel Kant, 1724–1804, a German philosopher who revolutionized epistemology and metaphysics. In his monumental work Critique of Pure Reason, 1781, Kant sought to resolve the conflict between the empiricists, like Locke and Hume, and the rationalists, like Descartes and Spinoza. Kant's solution was his theory of transcendental idealism, which argued that while all knowledge begins with experience, the mind actively shapes that experience. According to Kant, we cannot know things as they are in themselves, the noumenon, but only as they appear to us through the lens of our sensory experience, the phenomenon. He argued that the mind imposes certain structures, such as space and time, onto our experience of the world, and these structures are necessary for us to make sense of the world. In this way, Kant proposed a new understanding of how human beings can have knowledge and how the mind interacts with the external world. Kant's ideas about ethics, particularly his categorical imperative, also had a profound impact on moral philosophy. According to Kant, moral actions must be guided by a sense of duty, rather than by the consequences of actions or personal desires. His ethics emphasized universal principles that could apply to all rational beings, regardless of context. Modern philosophy, with its focus on reason, individual experience, and empirical evidence, laid the intellectual foundation for the world we live in today. The thinkers of this period shifted the focus from abstract metaphysical speculation to practical concerns about knowledge, morality, and society. From Descartes' radical doubt to Kant's transcendental idealism, these philosophers redefined the way we think about the self, reality, and our place in the world. The period also saw the rise of new ideas in politics, ethics, and religion, which would influence revolutions and the formation of modern democratic states. As the Enlightenment ideals of reason and progress took hold, philosophy became more closely tied to the development of science, technology, and the political structures of the modern world. In the next chapters, we will explore how these ideas influenced the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly with the rise of existentialism, phenomenology, and analytic philosophy.